Kurds in Syria refers to people born in or residing in Syria who are of Kurdish origin. The Kurds are the largest ethnic minority in Syria, comprising between 10% and 15% of the country's population according to the minority rights group International, CIA and pro-government sources. Syrian Kurds have faced routine discrimination and harassment by the government. Syrian Kurdistan is an unofficial name used by some to describe the Kurdish inhabited regions of northern and northeastern Syria. The northeastern Kurdish inhabited region covers the greater part of Hasaka Governorate. The main cities in this region are Al-Kamishli and Al-Hasaka. Another region with significant Kurdish population is Kobani in the northern part of Syria near the town of Jarablus and also the city of Afrin and its surroundings along the Turkish border. Many Kurds seek political autonomy for the Kurdish inhabited areas of Syria, similar to Iraqi Kurdistan in Iraq, or outright independence as part of Kurdistan. The name Rojava is also used by Kurds to name the Syrian Kurdish inhabited areas in relation to Kurdistan. Since the Syrian civil war, Syrian government forces have abandoned many Kurdish populated areas, leaving the Kurds to fill the power vacuum and govern these areas autonomously. Demographics: Kurds are the largest ethnic minority in Syria, and make up between 7 and 15% of the Syrian population as of 2011, between 1.6 and 2.5 million people. The Kurdish population in Syria is relatively small in comparison to the Kurdish populations in nearby countries such as Turkey, Iran, and Iraq. The majority of Syrian Kurds speak Kurmanji, a Kurdish dialect spoken in Turkey and northeastern Iraq and Iran, and are Sunni Muslims. It is estimated that at the beginning of the 20th century around 12,000 Kurds lived in Damascus. An unknown number of Kurds lived in the Kurda region. 16,000 Kurds lived in the Jarablus region, and an unknown number lived in the Jazira province where they were likely the majority. In the 1920s, after the failed Kurdish rebellions in Kemalist Turkey, there was a large influx of Kurds to Syria's Jazira province. It is estimated that 25,000 Kurds fled at this time to Syria. According to Stefan Spurl, these Kurdish newcomers constituted no more than 10% of the Kurdish population of Jazira at the time, and all were granted citizenship by the French Mandate authorities who recognized their agricultural skills. However, this contradicts with the estimates of the French geographers Fevret and Gibert. The French geographers Fevret and Gibert estimated that in 1953 out of the total 146,000 inhabitants of Jazira, agriculturalist Kurds made up 60,000, nomad Arabs 50,000, and a quarter of the population were Christians. Even though Kurds have a long history in Syria, the government has used the fact that many Kurds fled to Syria during the 1920s to claim that Kurds are not indigenous to the country and to justify the government's discriminatory policies against them. Geography: Kurds mostly live in a geocultural region in northeastern Syria. This region covers the greater part of the governorate of Al-Hasaka, a region also inhabited by many Armenians, Aramaeans and Assyrians. The main cities in this region are Kamishli and Hasaka. Another region with a significant Kurdish population is Kobane in the northern part of Syria near the town of Jarablus. The Kurdish inhabited northern and northeastern parts of Syria are called Kurdistan Abingste in Kurdish. An area of Kurdish concentration is Kurdar in the northwest, around the town of Afrin in Aleppo Governorate, a region that extends to the Turkish districts of Islahiye and Kirikan. Also, many Kurds live in the large cities and metropolitan areas of the country, for example, in the neighborhood of Ruk and Al-Din in Damascus, which was formerly known as Hay al-Akrad. History. Early settlements. Kurdish settlement in Syria goes back to before the Crusades of the 11th century. A number of Kurdish military and feudal settlements from before this period have been found in Syria. Such settlements have been found in the Alawite and North Lebanese mountains and around Hama and its surroundings. The Crusade fortress of Krak des Chevaliers, which is known in Arabic as Hisn al-Akrad, was originally a Kurdish military settlement before it was enlarged by the French Crusaders. Similarly, the Kurdah has been inhabited by Kurds for more than a millennium. Ayyubid period. In the 12th century, Kurdish and other Muslim regiments accompanied Saladin, who was a Kurd from Tikrit, on his conquest of the Middle East and establishment of the Ayyubid dynasty, which was administered from Damascus. The Kurdish regiments that accompanied Saladin established self-ruled areas in and around Damascus. These settlements evolved into the Kurdish sections of Damascus of Hayy al-Akrad and the Salia districts located in the northeast of Damascus. On Mount Kashatun, the Kurdish community's role in the military continued under the Ottomans. Kurdish soldiers and policemen from city were tasked with both maintaining order and protecting the pilgrims' route toward Mecca. Many Kurds from Syria's rural hinterland joined the local Janissary Corps in Damascus. Later, Kurdish migrants from diverse areas such as Diyarbakir, Mosul and Kirkuk also joined these military units, which caused an expansion of the Kurdish community in the city. Ottoman period. During the Ottoman period, some large Kurmanji-speaking Kurdish tribal groups both settled in and were deported to areas of northern Syria from Anatolia. The largest of these tribal groups was the Syrian Confederation, which was initially based in the Adıyaman region but eventually also settled throughout Anatolia. The Milli Confederation, which was documented in Ottoman sources from the year 1518 onward, was the most powerful tribal group and dominated the entire northern Syrian steppe in the second half of the 18th century. Their influence continued to rise and eventually the leader was appointed Ottoman governor of Raqa. The Danish writer Carsten Niebuhr, who traveled to Jazira in 1764, recorded 5 nomadic Kurdish tribes and 6 Arab tribes. According to Niebuhr, the Kurdish tribes were settled near Mardan in Turkey, and paid the governor of that city for the right of grazing the herds in the Syrian Jazira. These Kurdish tribes gradually settled in villages and cities and are still present in Jazira. In other parts of the country during this period, Kurds became a local chiefs and tax farmers in Akka and the Kazare highlands between Antioch and Latakia in northwestern Syria. The Afrin Plateau northwest of Aleppo, just inside what is today Syria, was officially known as the Sancak of the Kurds in Ottoman documents. Ibrahim Pasha of the Milli Confederation became one of the leading Hamidi cavalry leaders of the late 19th century Ottoman Empire. After his death in 1908, the Millers again revolted against the Ottoman government and eventually settled for the most part on the Syrian side of the newly drawn Turkish-Syrian border of 1922. The demographics of this area underwent a huge shift in the early part of the 20th century. Some Circassian, Kurdish and Chechens tribes cooperated with the Ottoman authorities in the massacres of Armenian and Assyrian Christians in Upper Mesopotamia between 1914 and 1920, with further attacks on unarmed fleeing civilians conducted by local Arab militias. In 1936, the French forces bombarded Amuda. On 13 August 1937, in a revenge attack, Kurdish tribes sided with Damascus and about 500 men from the Dakuri, Milan, and Kiki tribes led by the Kurdish tribal leader Sadagar al-Dakuri attacked the then predominantly Christian Amuda and burned the town. The town was destroyed and the Christian population, about 300 families, fled to the towns of Karmashli and Hasaka. The Christian population of the city of Nusaybin reduced after it was ceded to Turkey through the Franco-Turkish Agreement of Ankara in October 1921. The Christian population of the city crossed the border into Syria and settled in Karmashli, which was separated by the railway from Nusaybin. The immigration of Kurds beginning in 1926 following the failure of the rebellion of Saeed Ali Naqshbandi against the Turkish authorities led many Kurdish immigration to Karmashli. During the 1920s, waves of Kurds fled their homes in Turkey and settled in northeastern Syria, where they were granted citizenship by the French Mandate authorities. French Mandate. Following World War I, the victorious Allied powers and the defeated Ottoman Empire signed the Treaty of Chevreuse of 10 August 1920. The treaty stipulated that Ottoman Kurdistan, which included Kurdish inhabited areas in present Syria, was to be given autonomy within the new Turkish Republic, with the choice for full independence within a year. The Kemalist victory in Turkey and subsequent territorial gains during the Turkish War of Independence led to the renegotiated Treaty of Lausanne of 24 July 1923, which made no mention of a future Kurdish state. The majority of Ottoman Kurdish territory was given to Turkey and the rest was divided between the newly established French Mandate of Syria and British Mandate of Iraq. Under the French Mandate of Syria, the Kurds enjoyed considerable rights as the French Mandate Authority encouraged minority autonomy as part of a divide-and-rule strategy and recruited heavily from the Kurds and other minority groups, such as Alawite and Druze, for its local armed forces. Between December 1931 and January 1932, the first elections under the new Syrian constitution were held. Among the deputies there were 3 members of the Syrian Kurdish nationalist Zoyban party from the 3 different Kurdish enclaves in Syria: Khalil Bey ibn Ibrahim Pasha, Mustafa Bey ibn Shafin and Hassan Uni. In the mid-1930s, there arose an autonomist movement in the Jazira province among Kurds and Christians. Its Kurdish leaders were Hafo Aga, Kadir Bey, and Khalil Bey Ibrahim Pasha. Hafo Aga was the Kurdish chief of the Hevakan tribal confederation and one of the leaders of the Kurdish nationalist party Zoyban. He established himself as the representative of the Kurds in Jazira, maintaining the coalition with the Christian notables, who were represented by the Syriac Catholic Patriarch Ignatius Gabrielite Uni and Michel Dome, the Armenian Catholic president of the Karmashli municipality. The Kurdish Christian coalition wanted French troops to stay in the province in case of Syrian independence, as they feared the nationalist Damascus government would replace minority officials by Muslim Arabs from the capital. The French authorities, although some in the ranks had early encouraged this anti-Damascus movement, refused to consider any new status of autonomy inside Syria and even annexed the Alawite state and the Jabal Druze state to the Syrian Republic. Syrian independence. Osman Sabri and Dathim Miro, along with some Kurdish politicians, founded the Kurdistan Democratic Party of Syria in 1957. The objectives of KDPS were promotion of Kurdish cultural rights, economic progress and democratic change. KDPS was never legally recognized by the Syrian state and remains an underground organization, especially after a crackdown in 1960 during which several of its leaders were arrested, charged with separatism and imprisoned. After the failure of Syrian political union with Egypt in 1961, Syria was declared an Arab Republic in the interim constitution. Syrian Arab Republic Jazeera Census. On the 23rd of August 1962, the government conducted a special population census census only for the province of Jazeera, which was predominantly Kurdish. As a result, around 120,000 Kurds in Jazeera were stripped of the Syrian citizenship. In fact, the inhabitants had Syrian identity cards and were told to hand them over to the administration for renewal. However, many of those Kurds who submitted the cards received nothing in return. Many were arbitrarily categorized as ajanib, while others who did not participate in the census were categorized as maktumin, an even lower status than the ajanib. For all intents and purposes, these unregistered Kurds did not exist in the eyes of the state. They could not get jobs, become educated, own property, participate in politics, or even get married. In some cases, classifications varied even within Kurdish families. Parents had citizenship but not their children. A child could be a citizen but nor his or her brothers and sisters. Those Kurds who lost the citizenship were often dispossessed of the lands, which were given by the state to Arab and Assyrian settlers. A media campaign was launched against the Kurds with slogans such as "Save Arabism in Jazeera" and "Fight the Kurdish Menace." These policies in the Jazeera region coincided with the beginning of Barzani's uprising in Iraqi Kurdistan and discovery of oil fields in the Kurdish inhabited areas of Syria. In June 1963, Syria took part in the Iraqi military campaign against the Kurds by providing aircraft, armored vehicles and a force of 6,000 soldiers. Syrian troops crossed the Iraqi border and moved into Kurdish town of Zakko in pursuit of Barzani's fighters Arab cordon. Syrian policies in the 1970s led to Arabs resettling in majority Kurdish areas. In 1965, the Syrian government decided to create an Arab cordon in the Jazeera region along the Turkish border. The cordon was 300 kilometers long and 10 to 15 kilometers wide, stretched from the Iraqi border in the east to Ras Al Ain in the west. The implementation of the Arab cordon plan began in 1973, and Bedouin Arabs were brought in and resettled in Kurdish areas. The toponymy of the area, such as village names, were Arabized. According to the original plan, some 140,000 Kurds had to be deported to the southern desert near Al-Rad. Although Kurdish farmers were dispossessed of the lands, they refused to move and give up the houses. Among these Kurdish villages, those who were designated as alien were not allowed to own property, to repair a crumbling house or to build a new one. Newroz protests. In March 1986, a few thousand Kurds wearing Kurdish costume gathered in the Kurdish part of Damascus to celebrate the spring festival of Newroz. Police warned them that Kurdish dress was prohibited and they fired on the crowd, leaving one person dead. Around 40,000 Kurds took part in his funeral in Karmashli. Also in Afrin, 3 Kurds were killed during the Newroz demonstrations. Karmashli riots after an incident in a football stadium in Al-Karmashli. 65 people were killed and more than 160 were injured in days of clashes starting from the 12th of March. Kurdish sources indicated that Syrian security forces used live ammunition against civilians after clashes broke out at a football match between Kurdish fans of the local team and Arab supporters of a visiting team from the city of Deir al-Zor. The international press reported that 9 people were killed on the 12th of March. According to Amnesty International, hundreds of people, mostly Kurds, were arrested after the riots. Kurdish detainees were reportedly tortured and ill-treated. Some Kurdish students were expelled from their universities, reportedly for participating in peaceful protests. KNAS formation. The Kurdistan National Assembly of Syria was formed to represent Syrian Kurds based on 2 major conferences, one at the US Senate in March 2006 and the other at the EU Parliament in Brussels in 2006. The Kurdistan National Assembly of Syria seek democracy, for Syria and granting rights to Kurds and other Syrian minorities. They seek to transform Syria into a federal state, with a democratic system and structure for the federal government and provincial governments. Syrian civil war following the Tunisian Revolution and the Egyptian Revolution. The 4th of February 2011 was declared a day of rage in Syria by activists through the social website Facebook. Few turned out to protest, but among the few were Kurdish demonstrators in the northeast of the country. On the 7th of October 2011, Kurdish leader Mashal Tamo was gunned down in his apartment by masked men widely believed to be government agents. During Tamo's funeral procession the next day in the town of Karmashli, Syrian security forces fired into a crowd of more than 50,000 mourners, killing 5 people. According to Tamo's son, Faiz Tamo, "My father's assassination is the screw in the regime's coffin. They made a big mistake by killing my father." Since then, Kurdish demonstrations became a routine part of the Syrian uprising. In June 2012, the Syrian National Council, the main opposition group, announced Abdul Basit Saada, an ethnic Kurd, as the new leader. Kurdish rebellion protests in the Kurdish inhabited areas of Syria evolved into armed clashes after the opposition Kurdish Democratic Union Party and Kurdish National Council signed a cooperation agreement on the 12th of July 2012 that created the Kurdish Supreme Committee as the governing body of all Kurdish-controlled areas. Under the administration of the Kurdish Supreme Committee, the People's Protection Units were created to control the Kurdish inhabited areas in Syria. On the 19th of July, the YPG captured the city of Kobane, and the next day captured Amud and Efrin. The KNC and PYD afterwards formed a joint leadership council to run the captured cities. By the 24th of July, the Syrian Kurdish cities of Deir Kahemko, Sirkariya, Derbesi and Girklij had also come under the control of the People's Protection Units. The only major Kurdish inhabited cities that remained under government control were Hasaka and Karmashli. In 2014, Kurds in Syria declared the cantons of Syria, Kobane and Afrin to be parts of autonomous Syrian Kurdistan. Human rights of Kurds. International and Kurdish human rights organizations have accused the Syrian government of discriminating against the Kurdish minority. Amnesty International also reported that Kurdish human rights activists are mistreated and persecuted. Language. Kurds often speak the Kurdish language in public, unless all those present do not. According to the Human Rights Watch, Kurds in Syria are not allowed to officially use the Kurdish language, are not allowed to register children with Kurdish names, are prohibited to start businesses that do not have Arabic names, are not permitted to build Kurdish private schools, and are prohibited from publishing books and other materials written in Kurdish. But this is no longer enforced due to the civil war. Citizenship. In 1962, 20% of Syria's Kurdish population were stripped of the Syrian citizenship following a very highly controversial census raising concerns among human rights groups. According to the Syrian government, the reason for this enactment was due to groups of Kurds infiltrating the Al-Hasaka governorate in 1945. The Syrian government claims that the Kurds came from neighboring countries, especially Turkey, and crossed into Syrian borders illegally. The government claims that these Kurds settled down gradually in the region in cities like Amuda and Al-Karmashli until they accounted for the majority in some of these cities. The government also claims that many Kurds were capable of registering themselves illegally in the Syrian civil registers. The government further speculated that Kurds intended to settle down and acquire property, especially after the issue of the agricultural reform law. in order to benefit from land redistribution. However, according to Human Rights Watch, the Syrian government falsely claimed that many of the Kurds who were the original inhabitants of the land were foreigners, and in turn, violated the human rights by stripping them of the Syrian citizenship. As a result of government claims of an increase in illegal immigration, the Syrian government decided to conduct a general census on the 5th of October 1962 in the governorate, with claims that its sole purpose was to purify registers and eliminate the alien infiltrators. As a result, the verified registrations of the citizens of Syria were included in the new civil registers. The remaining, which included 100,000 Kurds, were registered as foreigners in special registers. Many others did not participate in the census through choice or other circumstances. They are known as maktumin, meaning unrecorded. Since then, the number of stateless Kurds has grown to more than 200,000. According to Refugees International, there are about 300,000 non-citizens Kurds in Syria. However, Kurds dispute this number and estimate about 500,000. A recent independent report has confirmed that there are at least 300,000 non-citizens Kurds living in Syria. According to the Human Rights Watch, by many accounts, the special census was carried out in an arbitrary manner, separating members of the same families and classifying them differently. HRW claims that some Kurds in the same family became citizens while others became foreigners, suggesting an inaccuracy in the Syrian government's process. HRW also alleges that some of the Kurds who had served in the Syrian army lost citizenship, while those who bribed officials kept theirs. Stateless Kurds also do not have the option of legally relocating to another country because they lack passports or other internationally recognized travel documents. In Syria, other than in the governorate of Al-Hasaka, foreigners cannot be employed at government agencies and state-owned enterprises. They may not legally marry Syrian citizens. Kurds with foreigner status do not have the right to vote in elections or run for public office, and when they attend universities they are often persecuted and cannot be awarded with university degrees. Non-citizens Kurds living in Syria are not awarded school certificates and are often unable to travel outside of the provinces. In April 2011, the president signed Decree 49, which provides citizenship for Kurds who were registered as foreigners in Hasaka. However, a recent independent report has suggested that the actual number of non-citizens Kurds who obtained the national ID cards following the decree does not exceed 6,000, leaving the remainder of 300,000 non-citizens Kurds living in Syria in a state of uncertainty. One newly nationalized Kurd has been reported as saying, "I'm pleased to have my ID card, but not until the process is completed will I truly trust the intentions of this action. Before my card is activated, I must have an interview, no doubt full of interrogation and intimidation, with state security. Citizenship should not be a privilege. It is my right." Influential Syrian Kurds: Ibrahim Hananu, Mohsen al-Barazi, Hosni al-Zaim, Prime Minister of Syria. Sherko Abbas, Kurdistan National Assembly of Syria President. Zero Abbas, Kurdish singer. Khalid Bakdash, leader of the Syrian Communist Party. Sigurkswan, influential Kurdish writer and poet. Sawan Hayko, Kurdish singer. Qadri Jamil, Kurdish politician and one of the leaders of the People's Will Party and the Popular Front for Change and Liberation. Datim Miro, Kurdish political leader and former chairman of the Kurdistan Democratic Party of Syria. Osman Sabri, Kurdish poet, writer and journalist. Muhammad Shako, Kurdish singer. Jaga Yusuf, Kurdish blogger.